interview, and they had to put out an article 2 days later trying to counter our Barry Jennings interview, and they actually did include Dylan showing them the video in the BBC piece. But
yeah, that gave them a heads up to come out with it, but only in the side piece, not in the main piece. Just like I made Popular Mechanics when we put out reports about how they did a hit piece on Michael Jackson, how they're dishonest, how they lie to people to get the interview, about how they claim it's not a hit piece. And then I also reported, do you mention your film that Popular Mechanics owns you? Do you mention that that I hear you're showing the book, advertising it? They had to they postponed it 2 weeks and went and removed that, I'm told. Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
Yeah, and then it's just an official version love fest. For instance, they pay a lot of attention to Martin Lazoe, head of CDI, that's Controlled Demolition Incorporated, the company that was hired to clean up both Oklahoma City and the World Trade Center disaster, and he just goes on and on and on about how there's no way they could have demolished that building. He would know about it, of course. Now, another key point is that the BBC themselves reported that the building had fallen 20-plus minutes before. Now, of course, the BBC tries to spin this and say, we're all saying the BBC is part of a conspiracy. But if you go back to when you broke that story, Alex, and I called in, the thing that I said...
I said, and you said, we need to know who told them that. We need to find out if this was a script. They laughed in 2 BBC articles saying nobody told us that, but now they've had to admit they were told that.
Exactly. Just like I said, it went out over the wire, went out over the Reuters wire. And what is so interesting about that Reuters wire is the fact that they had the official version of why the building had fallen, fires and damage, 7+ years before the report.
And they said 7+ years.
Well, now if you think about it,
before the new NIST report,
it's not out yet.
Exactly. And so the Reuters hours before, and then CNN and BBC, it fell from structural fires, a complete collapse, Building 7, Solomon Brothers, getting their script together. And I remember on the news them saying, Building 7 may fall, Building 7 has fallen. I remember hearing that on the radio. Locals remember it, and we have folks that saw the countdown. Now I want to go back. Let's go through this. Barry Jennings.
Yes.
Who he is briefly, how he got scared and said, please don't play that, what he really said in this piece, and how they tried to counter our preemption.
Sure, he was an emergency operating officer who happened to be in World Trade Center 7, one of the few people that went there on the morning of 9/11. Now, he goes there with the City Corporation Counsel, Michael Hess. Of course, the BBC did not go interview Michael Hess, wasn't interested in his story, was only interested in the story that we had. And then Barry Jennings offered us the information that he was stepping over bodies. If you watch that interview, I don't say, Barry, were there dead bodies? What were you doing? He's the one that volunteered the information that, in fact, when he had been rescued, he was stepping over bodies in the lobby.
But the key is the building's blowing up before Tower 1 or 2 falls.
Correct.
That's the key.
Correct. And he's in that 23rd floor and on his way down. When they hit about the 8th floor, that's when that explosion happens, and that is prior to either tower collapsing. And that is, again, not in the BBC piece at all. They just show him talking about explosions inside and outside the building. They give no relevance to when they occurred, and they go with the official FEMA timeline that it's the first tower coming down, and those are the explosions that Barry heard.
Now, how do they, because you've sitting there the last few hours watching it, how do they counter Jane Stanley saying the building's collapsed and it's right behind her?
Well, they have Jane Stanley on, and she's upset with us, of course. She's been harassed.
But she would never come on our show, we politely called her.
Absolutely not. And
now, the other guy, the other anchor, let's go through what he said a few months ago, but go ahead.
Sure. We Are Change confronted the anchor that was talking to Jane Stanley. And when he was confronted with the information, first there was a little time discrepancy, so he said he wasn't sure he was there. But then they showed him the tape, and he was like, well, that is really odd, isn't it? There could be something.
First he said, I didn't report on 9/11. I was off.
Yeah.
Who could not remember they didn't report on 9/11? Okay, he's reporting on it all day long. In there as the main anchor, going to the reporters on BBC World, and he does, and then he goes, "Oh, I do remember. Yes, but now I remember." And he has the full story suddenly. He's telling the truth, folks. And but then at the end, he does say, "Well, it does sound suspicious to me."
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, so how does she counter all this?
She doesn't counter it. She basically just says, I got that report. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. In other words, she read it off a teleprompter. Off of that Reuters press release, and they actually have the email from Reuters admitting that Reuters is the one that put out that info.
But all these years we said, we called Jane Stanley, we called the other guy, and say, you got that on a newswire. You were told that. Who reported? They would say, that's a conspiracy. Remember the guy who wrote, the editor, the head of BBC wrote 2 articles saying we were conspiracy theorists and no one told them that and it was a mistake. Then we said, well, give us the original tapes. Oh no, we lost those. Then they found them for this report.
Yeah, absolutely. And they make it out to be like, we were saying, oh, they were covering it up. Well, they were covering it up. They obviously have the archives from 9/11. It wasn't really that big of a search. They said that they found them in the 2002 section instead of the 2001 section. You would have thought that someone would have checked that out right from the beginning.
Those tapes are gold. All the 9/11 tapes were gone over. I mean, they re-air them on TV from every major channel. So it's just what we thought it would be.
Yeah.
I mean, the first BBC hit piece claims that you guys say the debris 4 miles away, but you used a MapQuest, which you didn't do, and the news reports say 8 miles away. They just made that up.
8 miles away over a mountain ridge in New Baltimore. This was not 8 miles away in Indian Lake. This was over a mountain ridge. Let me say that again. 8 miles away over a mountain ridge in New Baltimore, and they just totally gloss over that fact. And when they talk to the mayor of Indian Lake in Shanksville, in Indian Lake, he's like, oh, well, that's absurd. When we interviewed him, he said to us on camera, well, I wouldn't have known a plane had crashed there until they told me. I was asking where it was.
Now, you have that footage. You didn't put it in Loose Change Final Cut. Are we going to put that in Fabled Enemies?
We can put that in the extras for sure, just to show, because we're also going to show Anthony Santamacia, who was Willie Rodriguez's supervisor. I've already cut that together as an extra, backing up his entire story. Explosions in the basement prior to
the incredible part is we have hundreds of witnesses, the firefighters of Willie in there unlocking doors for him, and the debunkers just say, he's a liar, wasn't there.
And John Schroeder is in Truth Rising, you know, and he's a firefighter in the lobby, video evidence, you know he was there, but you got to understand, Alex, their big argument is they're confused. Everybody that doesn't agree with the official version of 9/11 is obviously confused, and we need to tell you what happened.
Well, why this BBC thing is important is it's just like in New Zealand, Australia, and Thailand, multiple countries, hours before he's captured and his name is released, they already have, the papers come out right about the time Kennedy's killed. He's not caught for hours, that Lee Harvey Oswald did it in print on newsstands before it happens. Now, they got their time zone screwed up. Same thing with Building 7. They got something went wrong. That's what they kept saying. It's going to come down at 2 o'clock. It's going to come down at 3, at 4. And it's got these little fires, and people are going, why don't we fight it? Well, buildings always come down. It's going to. You're going to see. And then perfectly falls down.
And I've recently seen a video of a much smaller steel-structured building where the facade does fall due to fire, but then when it's gone, oh, the steel structure is still right there.
Well, the debunkers always show buildings where sheetrock and stuff collapses.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying, and there's the skeleton.
Yes, absolutely. The metal, the steel structure of that building is unharmed when that thing comes down. You just have to look it up. And, you know, the debunkers always try to point, well, there's fire bringing the building down. No, fire is never brought down.
Now, what's this other part you're saying where he put out a press release saying that we're basically a cult? That's the new thing. We're a crazy cult of half the population.
Well, the London Independent, you know, followed up this BBC story saying that, of course, we were not going to be convinced, even though Cheyenne Sunder, the guy who told Popular Mechanics that 25% of the building was scooped out, is the main guy. He's the main this guy. And he's on there going, oh, well, now the working hypothesis is fire and structural damage.
But we have their own internal report saying it's not fire.
Yeah, that's the FEMA report where they say it has a very low probability of occurrence. And it's just wild to me. I mean, they were making excuses like, oh, if there was a controlled demolition, then the buildings next door, their windows would have popped out from the force. But you have this building come down in a symmetrical manner, not to damage the other buildings. See, if it was an asymmetrical collapse, it could have hurt the building to the left, to the right, behind it.
It's a beautiful job they did, and you did get windows blown out in the buildings beside it.
Yeah.
But I mean, you have the squibs, the blast, and they just hope that everybody's stupid. I mean, they're in a lot of trouble because they've got all these physicists, all these scientists, accredited scientific journals publishing this now, peer-reviewed. What are they going to do?
Well, what they'll do is they'll ignore the hard evidence, such as the molten metal under the scene. They won't show you the NASA thermal imagery that proves there are hot spots beyond what jet fuel could cause.